Thanks once again. I'm going to be fairly brief. As Pete said, Rob McCarron's my name from Pacific Seeds, based in Gunnedah. And I must admit, my first experience in the lower hunter was way back in the early 80s, and the previous rep to me sold a lot of forage sorghum in the 82 drought, I think it was. There was a lot of carryover, and I came down, couldn't sell a bag, and all the dairy farmers and farmers said, no, we don't want that forage sorghum crap. It was tall and went to head, and it was like cardboard or like strainer post to eat. We're not going to ever grow it again. And unfortunately, that took a few years to get that sort of image out of everyone's mind. So the first point I wanted to make about forage sorghum is probably the old adage of big is better is not the case with forage sorghum. For sure, if we let it nice and tall, more so than say this crop here, looks impressive, but if we start looking at quality aspect, we're better off being much shorter, sort of a metre high, manage it properly. So they're the points I wanted to raise up front. If we do the right thing, we can get good value and good results, end results out of forage sorghums. So that's the first point that I wanted to raise. Okay. Just quickly, summer forages, important option in the feed chain supply. I just put a couple of points up there. Very quick from planting to grazing, particularly coming out of a drought. So if we're planting now, for example, a forage sorghum, we could expect to be grazing in 4 to 6 weeks. Seeing we sort of past the spring period now, it is fairly quick growing. So it also gives us the opportunity to spell our pasture country, our grass country, let it get away. We can carry high numbers with forage sorghum because we do grow a lot in a small area. It also gives us the opportunity to, particularly later in the season, coming into the autumn when there's often a feed trough, to have something there before the oats and ryegrass comes in. We can conserve it obviously for hay, for silage, certainly either excess or grow it on its own for silage. And we can certainly grow, as Peter indicated, big amounts off a small area, so high stocking rates. And the other one down the bottom, more importantly these days, is particularly if we're coming out of a drought and we do want to look at changing our pastures over, it gives us a good opportunity with today's herbicides that are available to clean up our country before we go back to pasture. So forage sorghums have got a place in the feed chain. Without dwelling too much, there's a whole lot of different types of forage sorghums out in the marketplace. And firstly, we looked at Sudan by Sudan, indicates Sudan grass, very fine. There's a couple in that category, usually quick to flower, fine leaf, fine stem, but probably the drawback with a lot of those ones is fairly quick to flower. And I'll throw a photo up in a minute just to give you an indication. But if we can manage them, we've got stocking numbers, we cut it for hay, we still get very good results out of quicker flowering material. They certainly have a place. The traditional forage sorghum, which is sort of sorghum by Sudan, and there's a heap out in the marketplace. Again, they are sort of reasonably quick to flower, and most of the companies have one. Sorry, just backtracking one. The exception of the quicker flowering is one of ours, Superdan 2, which is a Sudan by Sudan. It's got delayed flowering, which is very beneficial. If it does happen to get away from you, you know it's still producing leaf, not just going to head. Sweet sorghum by sweet sorghum, I wouldn't expect too much to be grown in this area, but certainly in range graze situations, it's a great option. That type of material. Also for pit silage. I wouldn't advocate it for round bar silage. It's a sorghum by sorghum, so it is coarser in the stalk. You will get puncture in your plastic, so not recommended really for round bale silage. And probably the last one down the bottom has been the release in the last few years is the brown midrib sorghums. Very popular in the dairy industry because it's slightly better feed across the board as far as digestibility, palatability and animal performance, all because of lower lignin content. so it's more digestible. So we've got a couple in that range, but again, there's quite a few on the market in that category. And anyone that's sort of contemplating going this way, certainly our suppliers here are Norco, and I think Norco down the back. So they're our main supplier here in Norco, in Dungog. This just gives you a bit of an idea of the types. When we start talking about late flowering, early flowering, these particular ones here, you can see this was taken at Taree last season in February. The quick ones like Triple S and Sprint are out and head. If you left it like that to that stage, obviously there's not the value in the feed as compared to that, or better still, if we can control it, graze it, slash it, make hay or whatever, and our final regrowth. That's when forage sorghums get a bad name, when they are let to go to head, and really all you've got is stalk. The digestibility goes down, the protein, the whole box and dice goes down. We don't advocate letting paddocks go to head like that. And again, just another one. This was at Gloucester a couple of years ago. A later flowering BMR like OCTANE, you can see it's just starting to throw a head, still plenty of leaf. One of the quicker ones beside it, all you can see is a head and a stem. We don't want that, there's no value in that. That's really bad management. And just another one, not so much here, but certainly in the coastal environment, we've seen quite a bit of northern leaf blight the last couple of years. Again, there's not much value left in this one here where all the leaf has gone from northern leaf blight, but the OCTANE beside it, for example, one with a good disease-resistant package, still producing plenty of leaf. So just the smaller things we need to consider when selecting forage sorghums. One up at Gloucester of Chris Maslin, that's actually, well, it was OCTANE, but that's after either the second or third grazing. Don't be afraid if it doesn't get trimmed right down to the ground to come in and top it or slash it, because you will get excellent regrowth providing we've got rain. So throughout a season, if we planted sort of in any time now, we could expect to get 3, maybe 4 grazings or 3 grazings and a salvage hay cut at the end of the season. So that's the sort of feed that we can get off this sort of material. Just another one up at Rowlands Plains. Some of the previous speakers spoke about some of the, potential prussic acid with forage sorghums. I mentioned that up front, and it was interesting that the other speakers all touched on it's normally, whether it be acidosis or nitrate or prussic acid, it's normally introducing new stock or they gorge themselves. And the other thing with prussic acid, usually if you've got access to grass country, rather than just lock it into a straight forage sorghum, usually the gut can handle it. Certainly there will be certain cases where you get very high prussic acid under severe stress, then we can have issues. But generally speaking, most of the growers that grow are now aware that it contains prussic acid and nitrate, and we manage it accordingly. Lick blocks, high sulphur, also helps break the HCN down as well. So there are avenues we can look at, but just be aware it, and certainly the ones that we're talking of in this range here are probably our low to intermediate ones. The good old grain sorghum and Johnson's grass, which I hope no one's growing around here as a commercial crop, are very high potentially in prussic acid. Just in the crowd, we got many dairy farmers, or we mainly beef? How many dairy farmers we got? None, all beef. Okay. And again, this was touched on earlier, just on nitrate. And I guess down the bottom, the point was raised that after hay concentration doesn't affect nitrate, but certainly with prussic acid, it can lower it. And the same with silage. Just if we're looking at this forage sorghum as a scenario, as an option in our program, when and if it does rain, we can probably eliminate most of these temperatures up here. We probably should be somewhere around about here at the moment, I would think. So if it rains, we're probably going into pretty good conditions. So we haven't got to worry about cool temperatures. If we look at planting rates, there's two planting rates we've got, because Sudan by Sudan, bear in mind, is a smaller seed. It's about 70,000 seeds per kilo, as opposed to your traditional forage sorghums, which are sorghum by Sudan. We're talking of up to 30,000 seeds per kilo. So hence our planting rate is a little bit different between the species. And if we looked at our sorghum by Sudan, which is a lot of the hybrids on the market, in this area we're probably talking of sort of dryland, probably 10 to 15 kgs per hectare, in that range. Anyone with a bit of water can certainly go a bit higher than that. The higher the rate, the finer the end of product you'll get as far as stems are concerned. And I'd probably, with forage sorghum, prefer to go in this environment on the higher side than the lighter side for that very reason. The last thing you want is a patchy stand and you end up with thicker stems. The finer the better. And with Superdan and Sprint and Triple S and a few of the other Sudan by Sudans being 70,000, we can slightly come back on our planting rate because of the higher seed count. Peter mentioned that they're pretty big users of nutrients, and particularly nitrogen, and this is a pretty basic chart to use, but 1 tonne of dry matter, we're looking at 20 to 28 units of N, so fairly big user of nitrogen, as also with some of our other major ones in NPK and sulphur. Generally, as a rule though, because we are looking at sort of higher use of nitrogen, just be aware, if we're planting, how much we can plant direct with the seed. If we're working on narrow rows, which I guess a lot of you are here with combines and the such, we can get away with sort of higher rates, like nitrogen 24 units, or in other words 54 kgs of urea we can actually plant with the seed. But because of the concentration in the row, if we go out to wider rows, that obviously reduces. General rough recommendation, if you like, is 50 units or 110 kgs up front, plus your starter fertiliser. But to really get the benefits out of it, top dress it after each grazing or cutting with another 50 units of N. I mentioned big is not better, and this is supported by data, and it doesn't matter what sort of forage sorghum you basically look at. There's a trade-off between height and quality. In other words, our highest quality protein is in this range here. Where we should be grazing is in that metre to 1.2, even cutting hay. I know people say, oh, I'll let it go for another 2 weeks and I'll double the amount of bales I'll get. That's fine, but at the same time, you're back here on your protein. So there's a straight trade-off between quality and quantity. And if we take that one step, well, that's probably pretty good height there for either cutting or grazing, around that sort of 1.2 to 1.4 metres. And again, good height for grazing, just on waist high, under good conditions. Not like that. Still looks green, looks nice, and all that sort of stuff, but what can you see there? You see a lot of stalk, and that's what you don't want. You want this up the top of the leaf. That's where your energy and your protein is. Consequently, with energy, same as the protein, just a direct drop off with height and time. So again, we need to be really, to get the best out of these products, is in this range here. I guess the only exception, and we're not probably going to sell a lot around here, is the sweet sorghum, because of its sugar content, its ME actually increases with age. It dips here, and you can see energy actually picks up towards the latter part of its life. It's the only exception sort of in the forage sorghums where it reverses. But your protein still drops off. It's only the energy. Silage. Just some very, very quick information, just to give you an idea how much can we expect of them. This was at Gatton, our Gatton research farm, last season or season before. We had 3 varieties in this trial, just to give you an indication. Sort of the first cut after 48 days after planting, around that 10, 12 tonne to the hectare of dry matter. It was only 26 days to the second cut. It probably should have gone a bit longer. We were back to 4, 3, that sort of thing. And then 118 days, the third cut, if you like, and we were up sort of 6, 7, 8 tonnes per hectare. So when we looked across the season, we're looking at sort of in that 20 to 22, 23 tonnes of dry matter per hectare, just to give you an idea what you can expect off it. So we are talking much bigger quantities than some of our pastures and so forth, but we need to be spot on with our management. And just a very quick idea of the first cut, the second cut on our energy levels, 9.7, 8.3 and so forth. Protein, people say, oh, how do you get that sort of protein? But you can if you manage it properly and you've got good nutrition underneath. Don't let it get rank. Regrowth, good regrowth, you can get reasonable quality feed off it. So that's the point I really want to ram home. And again, just the regrowth patterns, that's a couple of the quick ones. You can see these ones here left unchecked, out in head. But if we manage them and we keep cutting them at the right stage, we can get growth. And again, that photo was taken, I think, in February, planted in late October, that crop. So we've had 3 or 4 months of good feed. Just a little plug here was, if you're looking at something for value, Sprint, there's some handouts over on the side wall there. With Sprint, it's probably about the cheapest you can buy anyway. It's the sedan by sedan, and there's $25 a rebate to farmers. Just got to go online to fill it out. So makes it a pretty cheap option. And if you're looking at something like that to fill a feed gap for a couple of months, that product would certainly well and truly do it. So that's that slide. Just while I'm there, there's also a summer forage agronomy guide. Any questions will be answered or could be answered in that handout. There's also just a ready REFNA with all the characteristics of all our forage sorghums and other products. I was asked to talk on forage sorghum. I had to throw Bluey. Bluey's not here, is he? No, he's not here, but he didn't actually say that when he was talking, but I said, don't forget about corn as an option, laddie. So corn, anyone that's set up for corn obviously is still going to give you much better quality feed if anyone's in that position for silage. Pete, I think that's about it. I'm exhausted. In summary, forages have a lot to offer. If managed correctly and right selection, many types and varieties on the market, select proven hybrids backed up by companies sort of having research programs. I think you're getting the best there. Can produce a lot of feed quickly, but need to manage them properly. And I keep stressing, manage them properly and you'll get good utilisation. And don't be afraid to slash after a grazing. And finally, if it does get away and it's dry and then all of a sudden we get 2 inches of rain, again, slash it. Your regrowth is going to be far better value feed than this big tall rank stuff. Thank you.